everyone, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be doing a wrap-up of my reading in November and then a discussion of some things I'd like to get to in December before the end of the year. So crazy that we're actually in December. I know everybody says that, but I genuinely am like, oh my gosh, this year is almost over, and it's just been a crazy one, especially the past couple of months have been particularly crazy for me. Before we start, I do want to apologize for my voice. I am sick, but I have the energy to do this, and I keep skipping weeks, and I really don't want to do that the rest of the year because there's always so much fun to have reading wise towards the end of the year, and I want to continue with that. But I may sound a little bit sick because I am, so just so you know, that is going on. But let's discuss what I read in November, just a very brief sharing of thoughts. I do have a reading vlog for November that's coming out probably next week, so you'll be able to see my more in-depth thoughts on there, but here I'll try to keep them as concise as possible. And the first book I read in November was Lovely War by Julie Berry. I ended up giving this about a 4-star. This is a story of two different romances set during World War I, which sounds very basic, but the fun part about it is that it is narrated by Aphrodite, the goddess of love, as well as a few chapters by Ares and Hades as well. Like you may expect, I ended up finding that I loved the writing and the storytelling aspects of this better than I enjoyed the actual story and the characters. Experiencing it from the perspective of Aphrodite and Ares and Hades was really interesting and just added a depth of emotion that I really enjoyed. The characters weren't necessarily particularly memorable, the love stories weren't particularly memorable to me, but I did fly through this book. I really enjoyed myself while reading it, and the writing and the storytelling aspect, at least the narrative aspect, really pushed it into a 4 stars for me. I think it probably would have been closer to a 3.5 if it wasn't for that great narrative aspect that I really found myself loving. The next book I completed was a reread, and it was actually for my podcast. We read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne for obvious reasons. This is the prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, if you do not know, following our main villain from the Hunger Games when he was much younger, and it's really, really interesting. It's a very psychological read and story, which I love. That's very up my alley. I really, really loved the psychological aspect of this. The first time I read it, I gave it closer to like a 3-star. This time I ended up giving it a 5-star because I realized how much I enjoyed it. I read it after having just reread the original trilogy, and I definitely feel like I have grown into this story. My interests in life have grown into it, and so I enjoyed it a lot better this time. I also feel like knowing what to expect going in a little bit better prepared me to look for how things led up to the ending, and I think that was a really good choice for me. And the ending of this book, while it doesn't have everything that I love, there's a couple things that I don't really love about the ending. There's one thing about the ending, or maybe 2 things that I really adore, specifically to do with Lucy Gray's outcome. If you've read this or seen the film, love that so much. And then a little bit about Coriolanus's ending is also very interesting to me. So definitely my main win for the month, I would say. Then I completed the audiobook for My Darling Girl by Jennifer McMahon, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. And I unfortunately didn't love this one. It was a little more in the gross horror realm than I usually read and prefer, so I didn't really love it. I also just, contemporary set stories are a hard sell for me. They just are. That's why I mostly read historical and fantasy, because contemporary set stuff tends to have content that I just don't love as much. I think I can do literary stuff a little bit better than I can like romance or general just contemporary lit. I prefer a little bit more exploration of psychology and things in it than often I get, and often it contains things that just don't match up with my personal beliefs, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it just doesn't make for necessarily a great reading experience. I know a lot of people have really enjoyed this one though, so don't let me turn you off from it. I got the audiobook from the Book of the Month subscription, and I mean, it was fun. It wasn't like it was absolutely miserable to listen to. I listened to the whole thing. I didn't DNF, but unfortunately it just wasn't for me. And the final book I completed this month was 6 Women of Salem by Marilynne K. Roach. This was my nonfiction November pick, and I ended up giving this about a 3.5 stars. It was definitely very interesting and actually very emotional for me to read this. I cried at one point. I got a lot madder about the Salem witch trials than I ever have. I mean, I've always known they were unfair and terrible, but I haven't ever been this immersed in the actual emotions and experience of it. So the emotions while reading this were very high because I wasn't used to experiencing it this way. But I had two main things about this that kind of didn't ruin the experience, but just lessened my rating. The first was that it says that it's told from 6 specific women in Salem, some of them being accusers, some of them being accused, some being executed, some not, but really it just explored all of the victims on some level. Like, it had an opening prologue where it introduced these 6 women, and throughout we get little bits of fictional portions where it's kind of exploring their emotional state, and it focuses on those 6 women. It doesn't do it for everybody, but most of the book actually was exploring everything going on, which was fine. I just feel like it made the title a little bit misleading for me. I expected it to be a little bit more specific, but it ended up being very, like, going through everything about the Salem witch trials, which was interesting. Like I said, I haven't really experienced it all the way through like this in a nonfiction setting, and so it was good for me and probably better for me than what this book promised, but it's not what this book promised, and I was going in expecting a little bit more specific focus just on these 6 women to really bring out all of the emotions and the experiences that would have been going on at this point, but it really just explored everybody, and it just became a lot of names. I couldn't keep track of them. It also at certain points ended up feeling like a bulleted list of things happening, like it was like, and then this, and then this, and then this. There was a lot of legal discussion, which was fine, but a lot of it, especially in the prologue and then sometimes throughout, there was a lot of discussion of like property laws and things like that, and I was like, this is so boring. I just wasn't interested. And I get that the author is coming at it from the perspective of dealing with very limited source information, because these women weren't that big of a deal until they were accused or became accusers within the Salem witch trials, and then history pays attention, whereas beforehand people weren't necessarily tracking all their movements or anything because they didn't know what was going to happen. So it's understandable why it was the way it was, because she's just working with what she has to work with. I just felt like something about the writing made it not as interesting as it possibly could have been if it was written by someone else. So yeah, that was too bad, but it did really bring me into that world, which I think is a big plus for it, and I ended up falling in love, particularly with Rebecca Nurse, was one of the 6 women that I most really loved reading from and learning about. That made me cry because I just thought she seemed like such a sweet, wonderful woman, and it's so sad that she had the fate that she had. And that's it for November, so not a huge reading month for me. Next week you'll get a little bit more information as to why November ended up being a little bit tricky, or maybe you follow me on Instagram and saw some things that I was posting that explain why this month was tricky, but you'll have to see in my blog next week for more details on that, because I just don't want to keep talking about it. And yeah, so you'll see it there if you're interested, and if you don't care, then that's fine too. So the end of the year, I'm just going to run through these really quick because I usually don't like knowing a ton about my books anyway when I go into them, so I don't know a lot about these, but I have 4 books here that I particularly would like to try to get to this month, and then there's plenty of others I also would love to get to, but we'll just start with these 4. The first one is one that I'm actually almost done reading already, and I was reading throughout actually a huge chunk of November. I just had things get in the way, like I mentioned, and that is The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the second Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson, and it's been on my list for ages, as you can imagine. I think it came out, I don't remember how many years ago, in 2011, so like 12 years ago, when I haven't read it yet. So I definitely really was excited to be able to get to this, and I've enjoyed myself. Like most people, it's not my favorite because it's very much kind of a just for fun type of book. It's got a lot of Western vibes and stuff, so it's not necessarily my style, and I don't expect these last 100 pages that I have to read to be groundbreaking or anything, but I've enjoyed myself. I really like Marassi, especially in comparison to Vin. I think it would be so easy for Sanderson to create very similar women in all of his books, and he doesn't, and I really love that about him. And I like that Marassi is a tough girl, but she's also more of an academic than a writer, and I think the way Sanderson finds that balance in her is very real, and I really enjoyed that. So that's probably been my favorite part of this book. I do like Wax and Wayne and their dynamic. There's been some dialogue. I know some people have complained about Wayne, especially in this first book, just feeling like he's not as funny as he's supposed to be, and I definitely have seen some dialogue that I'm like, okay, that just didn't hit very well. But some of it does, and I think their dynamic is really fun. So we'll see how the rest of it goes for me. Then, as promised, I'm going to be finishing Sylvia's Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell this month. I started this in October, and things got in the way then as well. Gosh, these last 2 months have been crazy, but anyway, things got in the way then as well, and so I haven't been able to finish it, but I really want to get to it by the end of the year, so I'm going to try to get through the rest of this. I'll probably start this next week, so you'll be seeing this Friday. Starting Monday is when I plan to get back into this. Then I have 2 books that I have various reasons I want to get to. The first one is Prize Women by Carolyn Lee. I only have 2 books left that I pre-ordered at the very beginning of the year that I haven't read yet, besides Sanderson's Secret Projects, which I have my own plans for those, so it's okay I haven't finished those, and the 4th one hasn't been released yet either, at least not in a way that I can access it, as I didn't support the Kickstarter to start off with. So I'm still waiting on that, but this is one of those 2 that I haven't read that aren't Sanderson that I pre-ordered. And the other one I do want to get to, I'm just less in the mood for it, so I was like, I wanted to finish all of the ones that I like at the very start of the year. I pre-ordered several and I wanted to get to all of those, but like I said, the other one that I haven't read yet, I'm not quite in the mood for, but I am feeling like I'm in a good mood to read this. All I know about this is it follows, I think it's set in the 20s, 1926 in Toronto, Canada, and there's this wealthy man who passed away who in his will stated, this is a real thing apparently, that the woman who bears the most children within the 10 years after his death would inherit what he had, I believe, or inherit his fortune, yes. And so there's like all these women trying to birth as many children as they can, and so I believe this follows 2 specific women involved in that, and that's all I know. It sounds bonkers and interesting, and so I'm very excited to read it and see how I end up feeling about it. And the last book on my list that I'd like to really make an extra effort to try to get to is The Kingdom of Sweets by Erika Johansen. This was my book of the month pick for December, and it is a retelling of The Nutcracker, so I feel like perfect time, obviously, to read it, and I would like to get to it at Christmas time, so hopefully I will be able to do it. But of course, as always, especially with the past couple months, I want to make sure I'm just reading based on my mood and what I'm wanting to get to in the moment, so I'm not going to put too much pressure on myself. I think the only ones I can guarantee will be read by the end of the month are those first 2, Alloy of Law that I'm almost done with already, and Sylvia's Lovers, because that is the goal. But like I said, we'll see on everything else. I'm really sad that I've slowed down so much the second half of the year. Usually the second half of my year I end up having a couple of new like favorites of all time. I actually usually slow down a little bit towards the second half of the year. I don't read quite as much within a month as I do at the beginning of the year, but I definitely usually read a bit more than I have been this year, and it's just been life getting in the way, which it happens and it's totally fine, but it is of course a little bit sad when you're not meeting goals or expectations. Like, it's not the end of the world, it shouldn't be if you're not meeting expectations, especially when it comes to hobbies, but you know, we all have high hopes for ourselves, and so I'm feeling a little bit of that disappointment, but that's all right. Hopefully December will just have some great things. I hope I find some new favorites, because honestly, I don't even remember the last book I would consider like a favorite of the year that I read. Like, the past few months, I don't think there's been one that I would say a favorite of the year. Maybe Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes I'll include, just because I'm a little bit surprised at how my opinion changed, but that was a reread, so it feels a little weird. And then before that, like, genuinely, I think the last book I read that I would like consider a favorite was probably July or August, so kind of sad, but oh well. I'm at least not reading things I hate. They're just all kind of in the middle of the road. So that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below if you've read any of the books I've mentioned, your thoughts on them, as I would love to know. What was your favorite thing you read in November? Did you read a new favorite? I would love to know that as well. Get the recommendations. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye!